views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, good evening and welcome to the Bronx Buzz. You probably know by now, but this is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters and writers and editors and journalists and photographers and filmmakers, and in this case, an artist who's doing something spectacular and unusual. Really, anybody who's putting anything out in the Bronx, and that's what we're going to buzz about. And our first guest is the senior reporter at The City, and welcome back to Rachel Holliday Smith. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You wrote a story about a pause on evictions that has been in place by executive order since the early days of the COVID outbreak. And now it looks like, I don't know, it's up for question. Is it going to stick around? Are we still going to have an eviction moratorium, or are we not? It appears she's ready, that's the governor, is ready to let it expire. What do you think?
Yeah, we're hearing from our sources in Albany, this is in the legislature, and from Hochul's office, that there's really not enough interest from Albany lawmakers to keep this eviction moratorium in place. As you said, it's been in place since the beginning of the outbreak of COVID-19 in New York, all the way back in March 2020. And it's been, kept alive in different forms, first by executive order by former Governor Cuomo, and then by legislation in Albany. And now, this weekend, on January 15th, that eviction moratorium expires. So we reported, myself and my colleague Josefa Velasquez reported that there's not interest from Albany lawmakers to keep that going one more time. So we may actually see evictions come back very soon.
It's very interesting because the entire state legislature has moved leftward, if you want to put it that way. There's a Democratic majority in the state legislature. You think they just lost the stomach for keeping it going? Or are there, from a political point of view, there's so much else going on, we know that, or at this point, are there real reasons that say, you know what, maybe we've done enough at this point?
Yeah, we were hearing from our sources and directly that they actually want to save their political firepower, so to speak, not for extending the eviction moratorium one more time, but for good cause legislation, which essentially would make tenants' rights much stronger in New York and allow tenants to stay in their apartments for many other reasons. And landlords are fighting it very hard. So that's going to be a really big fight. And we're hearing that even tenant advocates who you would think would be really behind extending the eviction moratorium are saying, you know what, this is going to be a really hard fight, and we're going to keep our political capital for that other fight. I will also say that, I was hearing from sources that the last time the eviction moratorium was extended, you would think that it would sail through and it would be easy, and it did pass, but 20 Democrats actually voted against it. So it seems as though even in a very blue legislature, there's less political interest to keep this going.
I have to tell you, I have friends and others who are in real estate and property owners, and I always wondered how they were doing during this period of time where their income was severely challenged, or maybe in some cases they were waiting for governmental checks to, supplement what they were not getting. But, we need good development. We need good developers. And so maybe there's some of that as well, is that elected officials, no matter what party they're from, are saying, you know what, the next time I want something built, or I want it right, or I want the kind of project in my neighborhood, I'm going to lose a friend if I don't handle this in this way.
Yeah.
Am I onto something there?
I think you are onto something, and we certainly have heard from those small landlords and big landlords, to be honest, who are saying the same thing, which are saying, this is really hurting me, hurting my bottom line. Of course, tenants are saying that as well. They are struggling deeply and are very afraid of being out on the street. But interestingly, in this particular political debate or negotiation around evictions. There are landlord groups who are siding with tenant advocates who are saying, let's actually just get rent relief funding for everyone, meaning paying those landlords who haven't been collecting rent checks for so long and allowing tenants to get some of that back rent paid. So they're coming together to say, hey, we got to get a payout here and we have to fill this hole of rent that hasn't been paid. So that's also where some political capital is being spent rather than extending this moratorium.
That is a fascinating dynamic. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we'll get some tenant leaders in here at some point and hear exactly what they think. But the idea that they would work together, maybe that would be one of the unintended positive consequences of what's happened here, because they say, maybe there's a better way to handle it. I was surprised in your piece. I was surprised not surprised when you said that landlords were, certainly wanted to let the thing expire, but that tenant groups also were kind of like, you know what, let it go. It's not helping us.
Yeah, exactly. I should say not all tenant advocates feel this way, but some of some of the big ones are really, it's not that they're saying, yes, let's let it expire, but they're rather not fighting for extending it, which is notable. That is a notable change. Yeah. It's very interesting.
The other thing that is involved in this, and we have it with all the COVID regulations and everything else, and I think it's one day I bring a psychologist on and talk about it. It's a fascinating dynamic about people going back to work, and that I guess if they don't have the pressure of the rent, we know what's out there with COVID and Omicron and everything else, and they say, you know what, right now, I don't have to worry about my rent. I'm not going back to work. That has a trickle-down effect, a trickle-down negative effect on all of us, because the economy is not building. We see what happens when, companies are starving for employees. That's part of this too, right?
It is. We didn't address that in our specific reporting, but certainly that is an argument that's being made. It's all sort of tied together. I will say that the folks who will probably be most affected by this eviction moratorium being lifted in the most immediate sense are actually people whose cases were from 2 years ago, before the pandemic started. So those folks are not necessarily the ones who are, not paying rent because of the pandemic. It's actually the people who 2 years ago, maybe they had a marshal's warrant, they were about to get thrown out.
And so they got saved, even though maybe that ultimately, could or should happen. I don't want to root against anybody, but it could be the case. Let's talk about the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, ERAP. Is that seen, in other words, in your assessment, that there's kind of a political negotiation going on, that is one of the chips at play, that, what, rather than do it this way, we'll put more money into rental assistance, lower the cost of people's rents, et cetera?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's what the coalition of tenants and landlords are saying. They're saying, let's get more federal money into ERAP, this rent relief program from the state. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of evidence that is even going to come close to covering the whole, the big pot of money that needs to be repaid. But yes, that is where folks are coming together to say, hey, we really need more money here. But a lot of that is dependent on the federal government. Certainly, as the Albany session goes forward this spring, the state budget could throw in some money to fill some of that need, but it will not come close to what, is estimated.
What is really needed in that
exactly.
case. I wonder, I mean, I'm not an expert on it, but Build Back Better, I wonder if there's some monies in there for rent protections and things like that. And again, I realize it's one of 50 states and all that. It might not take, and I'm going to say it funny, throw another $2 billion in there and you're done out of the, $3 trillion that they're looking for. It's possible to do that. And that would really make a major difference in people's ability to stay in their apartments.
It would. And right now, I hope I don't get these figures incorrectly, but I think that right now, out of $1 billion put aside from the federal government for rent relief right now, New York State only got 27 million, which is an incredibly small figure. So we got to share with the other 50 states. You're actually totally right about that. But
Yeah, but one of the things in your article, which was right at the end, which I thought was fascinating, and you've you've talked about it slightly here, is this whole idea of self-evicting. That
Mm.
a landlord says, "You're out of here, get out," and then people start packing up and they start getting out, but they don't have to do that. I thought when I read it, I said, that's really good advice. You did a good job with that. So why
Thank
don't you just review the
Sure.
self-eviction issue and explain it so anybody thinking about it would know about it.
Sure. And that's the first thing that housing attorneys who are in housing court say when I ask, what is the advice you would give to tenants, which is don't self evict, meaning the only person who can actually evict you is a judge's order and a marshal at your door. So if you get an eviction notice, that does not mean you have to leave. And they do talk to tenants often who think that I got to go, I got to pack up my stuff and go. So you don't
Right.
self evict is the advice. And I'm actually writing a second piece coming up soon about more advice from housing attorneys for tenants as they sort of come to terms with this moratorium lifting and folks who think their landlord might actually file a case against them.
Right.
It's
Do you and again, I don't want to put you on the spot because we're just here talking. Do you know about how many tenants either in the Bronx or in the city could be affected either way for
Mhm.
this legislation?
I
I
don't,
don't have that.
yeah,
Okay,
I don't have an
we can
estimate.
find that out.
Yeah, off the top, but I know I should say that there's such a court backlog right now from cases in these past 2 years that it is unlikely that if you are facing a new eviction case that you'll actually be forced to leave for several months probably because there's such a backlog. So
Right.
again, if you're a tenant and you're thinking my landlord is probably going to go after me, this eviction moratorium's up January 15th, am I going to have to leave next week? you you won't. The case will wind its way through the courts and you need to find an attorney certainly, but
No
you don't
question.
have to be
What
forced.
reminded me, by the way, about that whole self-eviction was when you said that they already have a marshal's order, and
Mm,
that reminded me that that's really the only circumstance on which you really have to, like, pack up and
go.
go
Yeah, exactly.
and deal with that. We've uncovered something. This has been a very interesting dialogue for me. The notion of them working together, or tenants and landlords and property owners being on the same page, is very interesting. I wonder also, just speculation on my part, if this will also ease up some of the systemic issues that have, you say there's a backlog. There's been a backlog in New York, in the Bronx housing court for generations. I wonder if this will let us really catch up and get our arms around it finally. Got about
I,
30
I
seconds to answer that.
I think that the answer to that is it will not help in any way.
Oh,
Every housing attorney I've
I'm
talked
trying so hard.
every housing attorney I've talked to said it is much worse than it's been, even
Much
with
worse.
virtual hearings. Unfortunately, that's
Uh,
yeah.
last question, just a couple of seconds. Want to make a prediction? You think they're going to let it expire? From what
I
you
think
said,
that
it sounds to me
yeah,
like it's gone.
I think that they will let it expire. If
Wow.
they change anything, it will be a slight extension to get through the budgeting process. But I can't see it being extended in a huge long way like it has been in the past.
I hope that viewers in the Bronx will appreciate great reporters like Rachel Holliday Smith, because that's how we find out about stuff. And one of the things about this show, which I love, is I learn a lot from all the great reporters who are out there. And you are one of them. Thank you so much, Rachel Holliday Smith. Make sure you read The City and read her in The City. And we'll look forward to your follow-up article with those housing lawyers. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. Had fun.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. Gary will put on his other hat. And we're going to talk to an artist who's an environmental artist. Wait till you see what he does. He's got a show coming up, and we'll do that in a moment. Don't go away.